Imagine climbing down into a mountain in northern Spain through a narrow vertical shaft, over 13 meters straight down. There is no other way in. Number path, no tunnel, no second entrance. Just that one narrow opening dropping into a dark, damp, forgotten space buried under layers of clay and stone for hundreds of thousands of years. Inside that cave, scientists found thousands of human bones belonging to more than 28 ancient individuals who lived hundreds of thousands of years ago. For decades, one question haunted every researcher who entered that chamber. How did all these bones end up in a place no human or animal could reach easily? But among all those bones, one single skull made an entire team of scientists stop and say, "This isn't an accident, this is a murder." And the strangest part, the story doesn't end with the killer. It leads to a much deeper question about the very first time a human being chose to bury their dead with meaning. Let's break down the oldest cold case in human history. Every detail here is backed by peer-reviewed science. The site is called Sima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones, buried deep inside a mountain range in northern Spain. Excavation began in 1984 and continued for decades. Researchers eventually pulled out more than 7,000 bone fragments, belonging to at least 28 individuals, ancestors of Neanderthals. That number alone makes this the largest collection of human fossils from before the appearance of modern Homo sapiens found anywhere on Earth. It's exactly why UNESCO recognized the site as a World Heritage location. And here's what stumped scientists from day one. There is no natural path into this chamber, except that deep vertical shaft. No animal could have dragged bodies down there by accident. No group could have simply wandered in. Something else, something deliberate, had to explain why dozens of human bodies ended up at the bottom of a pit that almost nothing can reach. Before landing on an answer, researchers tested and rejected theory after theory. Theory 1. Maybe individuals were exploring the cave and accidentally fell down the shaft. But that doesn't explain 28 people across repeated time periods, spanning generations. Statistically, the odds of that many accidental falls happening again and again are almost zero. Theory 2. Maybe predators dragged bodies into the pit. Same problem. Even predators would need to repeatedly navigate a vertical 13-meter drop, generation after generation. Also statistically implausible. Once both theories were ruled out, only one explanation remained. The humans themselves were bringing their dead to this exact spot, on purpose and repeatedly, generation after generation. Over the decades of excavation, researchers recovered 17 complete or near-complete skulls, an enormous number for a site this ancient. But one skull in particular stopped everyone in their tracks and forced scientists to rethink everything they assumed about the pit. It took 20 years of continuous excavation, piecing together 52 separate bone fragments, before researchers finally reconstructed it. A skull that became known as Skull 17. It belonged to a relatively young adult, and from the first glance, it was different from every other skull at the site. Above the left eye were two clear, nearly identical fractures on the same section of the frontal bone. And they weren't random. Before this discovery, scientists already had scattered evidence of violence among ancient humans. Old healed fractures on individuals who survived injuries and lived on for years. But what made this skull completely different was that the damage here wasn't evidence of violence someone survived. It was the direct, most likely cause of death itself. This was the first clear evidence of actual lethal violence. Not just conflict, but a kill. The research team didn't rely on the naked eye the way older studies did. They used advanced medical imaging tools and built a precise digital model of the skull to analyze the fracture shape and angle with forensic-level accuracy, the same way a modern crime lab would examine evidence today. The result was shocking. Both fractures were made by the same type of tool, but struck at slightly different angles. Two separate blows, not one. And here's the obvious question any careful scientist would ask next. Could the skull have simply fractured from the fall into the pit itself? Researchers ruled that out for two solid reasons. First, the odds of the same body hitting the exact same spot twice, at two different angles, during a single fall, are close to statistically impossible. Second, accidental fall injuries typically occur on the sides of the skull, not squarely above the eye, dead center on the forehead, which is exactly where both wounds were located. Every piece of physical evidence rules out an accident and supports, powerfully, the theory of a direct, targeted attack. There's one more detail that adds a genuinely forensic layer to this story. The wounds were both positioned on the left side of the face, which strongly suggests the attacker was right-handed. That lines up with earlier studies showing that most inhabitants of this site were, in fact, predominantly right-handed tool users. Even after more than 400,000 years, a detail this small can hand us a thin, fragile thread pointing toward the identity of a possible attacker. There's also no sign of healing anywhere around the wounds, meaning the victim died directly from these two blows and didn't survive afterward, even briefly. And researchers interpreted the presence of two separate lethal strikes, rather than a single blow, as strong evidence of clear intent to kill, not an accidental injury or a single quick defensive strike. The weapon itself, though, remains unidentified to this day, the one piece of this case still genuinely open. Researchers believe the most likely candidates are a sharpened wooden spear, a stone-tipped spear, or a handheld stone axe, but there's no conclusive evidence pinning down exactly what it was. Even after all this precise analysis, part of the mystery remains unsolved. These findings were fully published in a scientific study in 2015, and researchers agreed to describe it as the oldest documented evidence of premeditated murder and lethal human-on-human violence in the entire fossil record, before writing existed, before cities existed, before even modern Homo sapiens as we know them existed. One human was already deliberately killing another. But here's the twist I promised you at the start. And honestly, it's stranger than the murder itself. If this were just one skull, we could call it an isolated individual incident and move on. But the problem is, at least 28 individuals from different time periods all found their way into this exact same deep pit, a pit almost nothing can reach. The question that puzzled scientists even more than the identity of the killer was this: why would an entire tribe, across generations, repeatedly go through the effort of carrying a dead body a long distance, hauling it to a narrow, deep mountain shaft, and deliberately throwing it in, over and over again? To support this idea, researchers have real physical evidence, not just theoretical speculation. Among the thousands of bone fragments in the pit, they found exactly one stone tool, a handaxe, carefully carved from a rare red stone that doesn't naturally occur anywhere near this mountain region, meaning someone deliberately brought this rare stone from somewhere far away, carved it skillfully, and placed it among the bodies of the dead, despite there being no other similar tool anywhere else at the entire site. Researchers nicknamed this tool after a legendary mythical sword, and most interpret it as a gift or an offering left with the dead. Some consider it among the earliest known evidence of symbolic behavior in human history. To be clear, precise analysis of the tool couldn't definitively prove whether it was actually used as a weapon or for any practical purpose, since its surface had degraded too much over such an immense span of time. So we can't directly link it to the murder itself with certainty, but its presence strongly supports the idea that this location held deep, special meaning for the people who used it. The conclusion researchers arrived at is bold and genuinely surprising. This wasn't just a random way of disposing of an inconvenient body. This is considered among the earliest known evidence of intentional funerary behavior in humans. The first time a human community treated death with purpose and meaning, instead of simply abandoning bodies out in the open for scavengers, which means the very same community that witnessed a brutal, violent killing also carried, at the very same moment in time, an early awareness of death and a form of respect for those who died, an awareness that may be far older than any researcher imagined before this discovery. So this story, which began with one broken skull inside a deep pit, ends up telling us two completely contradictory things about ancient humans at the exact same moment in time: their capacity for lethal violence against members of their own kind, and, simultaneously, their capacity to treat death with clear meaning and intention. Even 400,000 years ago, humans weren't simply creatures hunting to survive, day to day. They were already deeply complex, carrying real darkness and real humanity at the exact same time. And that's exactly what makes archaeology this compelling. One small, broken, forgotten bone at the bottom of a dark pit can open the door to questions far deeper than when this person lived. Questions about who we really are and who we've always been. Are violence and compassion opposites in human nature? Or are they two sides of the same coin, present in us long before written history ever existed? Science still doesn't have a final answer, but the evidence in front of us today forces us to rethink every simple picture we ever had of the caveman. So tell me in the comments, do you think this was a deliberate, premeditated murder, exactly like the researchers say, or a tragic accident that got completely misread?